What happens when a concert tour that was already one of the biggest stadium runs of Bruno Mars' career suddenly gets even bigger? The answer may be unfolding right now, because the Romantic Tour is no longer simply a 2026 stadium spectacle. With the latest 2027 expansion, Bruno Mars' global concert tour is now approaching an astonishing 117 performances, transforming what began as a major comeback tour into a massive international touring phenomenon. And if you are following Bruno Mars, the Romantic Tour, Bruno Mars 2027 tour dates, concert news, stadium shows, or the latest music industry updates, make sure you stay with us until the end, because the newest announcement reveals just how enormous this tour has become. And there is one important detail that could make fans wonder whether this is truly the final chapter. But before we get into the numbers, the cities, and what this expansion means for Bruno Mars' touring future, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this story is moving quickly and Bruno Mars' The Romantic Tour continues to grow in ways few fans could have predicted. Bruno Mars has officially expanded the Romantic Tour into 2027, adding a major series of stadium performances across Australia, New Zealand, and Asia, while also adding another performance in Mexico City. According to the latest announcement, 26 new stadium shows have been added across Australia, New Zealand, and Asia, with an additional Mexico City performance bringing the total expansion even higher. The result is staggering. What was once announced as a relatively compact headline tour has now evolved into a global stadium campaign stretching across multiple continents, dozens of cities, and more than 100 performances. Recent reporting places the expanded tour at more than 115 stadium concerts worldwide, while the latest running total being discussed puts the overall schedule at 117 shows so far. And that number matters, because 117 shows is not simply another statistic on a concert poster. It represents the extraordinary scale of Bruno Mars' return to the road, especially considering that the Romantic Tour marks his first full headline tour in nearly a decade. Think about that for a moment. Bruno Mars spent years away from the traditional full-scale global touring cycle. Then he returned with The Romantic, a new era, a new album, a new stadium production, and a tour that immediately exploded because of demand. The opening numbers were already extraordinary. The tour generated 2.1 million tickets sold in a single day, setting a Ticketmaster record and delivering the largest single-day ticket sales in Live Nation history across North America, Europe, and the United Kingdom. And instead of slowing down after the initial announcement, the tour kept expanding. More cities, more stadiums, more second nights, more third nights, and eventually more countries. That is the key story behind the Romantic Tour. This is not simply Bruno Mars adding a few extra concerts because tickets performed well. The entire scale of the tour has changed. At first, fans were looking at a major 2026 stadium tour. Now, they are looking at a worldwide concert schedule that stretches deep into 2027. And the 2027 chapter is particularly significant. The new schedule begins in Japan. Bruno Mars is scheduled to open his 2027 run on January 4th and 5th at Vantalen Dome, Nagoya. From there, the tour moves to Sapporo for 2 shows on January 10th and 11th. Then comes Saitama. 2 performances at Belluna Dome are scheduled for January 15th and 16th. Next is Osaka, where Bruno is scheduled for 2 nights at Kyocera Dome Osaka on January 19th and 20th. The Japanese run continues in Fukuoka with 2 performances at Mizuho PayPay Dome on January 23rd and 24th. And then comes Tokyo. The Tokyo Dome is scheduled for January 27th and 28th. That means Bruno Mars is not simply making a quick stop in Japan. He is mounting a major multi-city Japanese stadium and dome run. 12 performances across 6 Japanese cities. And that is only the beginning, because after Japan, the Romantic Tour moves south. Australia becomes the next major destination. On February 13th, Bruno Mars is scheduled to perform at Optus Stadium in Perth. Then the tour reaches Melbourne for 2 nights at Marvel Stadium on February 19th and 20th. Brisbane follows on February 28th at Suncorp Stadium. Then Sydney gets 2 nights at Accor Stadium on March 4th and 5th. And finally, the Australian and New Zealand chapter reaches Auckland, New Zealand, for a March 13th performance at Eden Park. The scale is impressive, but there is another reason this part of the tour is generating attention. Tyla is scheduled to join Bruno Mars as a special guest for the Australia and New Zealand shows. And Anderson .Paak will also return to the touring universe as DJ P.Wee. For longtime Bruno Mars fans, the presence of Anderson .Paak is especially meaningful. Their partnership through Silk Sonic has already produced one of the most celebrated modern R&B collaborations, and Anderson's DJ P.Wee persona has become an important part of Bruno's live show environment. So even as the romantic tour expands geographically, Bruno is continuing to connect different chapters of his musical career. But the biggest surprise may come after Australia and New Zealand, because Bruno Mars is not ending the 2027 run there. He is heading back into Asia, and this is where the tour becomes even more remarkable. Singapore is scheduled to receive 4 performances at the National Stadium, April 13th, April 14th, April 17th, April 18th. For nights, 1 city, 1 stadium, and another indication of the enormous demand surrounding Bruno Mars. Then comes Bangkok. 2 performances at Rajamangala Stadium are scheduled for April 24th and 25th. After Thailand, the tour heads to Kaohsiung, Taiwan. 2 nights at Kaohsiung National Stadium are scheduled for May 1st and 2nd. Then comes Hong Kong, and this is another major multi-night run. Bruno is scheduled to perform at Kai Tak Stadium on May 7th and 8th, followed by additional performances on May 11th and 12th for nights in Hong Kong, and then the tour moves to Manila. The Philippine Arena is scheduled to host Bruno Mars on May 15th and 16th. Finally, the 2027 Asian leg reaches South Korea, and this finale is huge. For performances at Goyang Stadium are scheduled for May 21st, May 22nd, May 25th, and May 26th. That means Bruno Mars is currently scheduled to close this massive Asian chapter with 4 performances in South Korea. But here is where the story gets interesting. If you have been watching the romantic tour from the beginning, you might remember that the tour did not start anywhere near this size. The original announcement was significantly smaller. Demand changed everything. Second shows were added, then more shows, then more cities, then more countries, and eventually, the tour transformed into one of the largest stadium concert campaigns associated with Bruno Mars. The numbers tell the story. The tour has already visited major venues across the United States, Canada, Europe, and the United Kingdom. From Las Vegas to Arlington, from Nashville to Chicago, from Toronto to Paris, from Berlin to Amsterdam, from Madrid to Milan, from London to New Jersey. And now the story continues into Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Thailand, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the Philippines, and South Korea. This is why the 117 show figure is so significant. It shows how dramatically audience demand has reshaped the tour. And there is an even bigger question hiding behind that number. How far can the romantic tour actually go? Because once a tour reaches this scale, the conversation changes. It is no longer only about individual concerts. It becomes about touring history. It becomes about attendance. It becomes about stadium capacity. It becomes about ticket demand. It becomes about the economic impact of one superstar moving from continent to continent. And Bruno Mars is doing exactly that. The romantic tour is becoming a global entertainment machine. But it is important to separate confirmed information from speculation. At this moment, the newly announced 2027 schedule gives fans a clear picture of Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and Asia. There are confirmed performances. There are confirmed venues. There are confirmed dates. But that does not automatically mean every possible market has been announced. And that distinction is especially important for fans who are waiting for Bruno Mars to return to their own country. In Indonesia, for example, the newly announced Asian schedule does not currently include Jakarta or another Indonesian city. That means Indonesian Bruno Mars fans will have to wait for any potential future announcement rather than assuming another date has already been confirmed. And that is where the suspense around the romantic tour becomes even stronger. Because when a tour keeps expanding, fans naturally begin asking one question: what comes next? Could additional cities be announced? Could more stadium dates be added? Could another region eventually appear on the schedule? Or will the 117-show milestone ultimately represent the final shape of the romantic tour? Right now, the answer is not something fans should assume. The confirmed schedule is already enormous. And perhaps that is the most fascinating part. Bruno Mars does not need another expansion to prove the scale of this tour. He has already done it. He has taken a headline tour that began after years away from a full global touring cycle and turned it into a multi-year international stadium event. And the momentum behind it is rooted in something very simple. People want to see Bruno Mars perform live. They want the hits. They want the choreography. They want the musicianship. They want the retro-inspired production. They want the energy of songs like 24K Magic, Treasure, That's What I Like, Uptown Funk, Grenade, Just the Way You Are, Locked Out of Heaven, and the newer material from the romantic era. They want to see the full Bruno Mars experience. And that demand is precisely what has pushed this tour to such extraordinary numbers. There is also something symbolic about the timing. Bruno Mars is not merely touring behind nostalgia. The romantic tour represents a new chapter. His fourth solo album, The Romantic, arrived in 2026, giving the tour a fresh musical identity while allowing Bruno to revisit the songs that established him as one of the biggest pop and R&B performers in the world. That combination is powerful. A new album, a new tour, a massive stadium production, and a catalog filled with global hits. It creates a concert experience that can appeal to multiple generations at the same time. And that may help explain why ticket demand has been so intense. The audience is not limited to one era of Bruno Mars. Some fans discovered him through Just the Way You Are. Others came in through Locked Out of Heaven. Others through Uptown Funk and Silk Sonic. Others through 24K Magic. And a newer generation is experiencing the romantic era in real time. All of those audiences are now converging inside the same stadiums. And that is what makes a 117-show tour possible. But there is another pattern worth watching. Every time fans thought the tour had reached its limit, another announcement changed the picture. That is the pattern interrupt in this entire story. You think the tour is finished. Another date appears. You think the international schedule is complete. Another country is added. You think the stadium run has reached its maximum size. Then demand pushes the numbers even higher. That pattern has defined the romantic tour from the beginning. And now the tour is carrying that momentum into 2027. Imagine the opening night in Japan. January. Packed dome. Thousands of fans waiting for the lights to go down. The countdown begins. The stage comes alive. And Bruno Mars walks out knowing that this is not simply another concert. It is the beginning of another chapter in one of the largest tours of his career. Then imagine the journey that follows. Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Thailand, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the Philippines, South Korea. 9 markets, dozens of performances, millions of potential audience members, and a production that has to move across countries, venues, borders, equipment schedules, rehearsal cycles, and international logistics. That alone tells you something about the ambition behind the romantic tour. A tour of this size requires extraordinary coordination. It requires musicians, dancers, technicians, stage crews, lighting designers, sound engineers, transportation teams, production managers, venue staff, promoters, security teams, and countless other people working behind the scenes. When fans see Bruno Mars standing in the spotlight, they see the final product. But behind that moment is a traveling operation capable of moving an enormous stadium production from one country to another. And now that operation is scheduled to continue well into 2027. The numbers are therefore more than just marketing. They represent scale. They represent demand. They represent endurance. And they represent the extraordinary position Bruno Mars occupies in global live music. From the first ticket sale records to the latest international expansion, the Romantic Tour has continued to demonstrate that Bruno Mars remains one of the most powerful names in live entertainment. And now, with the tour approaching the 117-show mark, the question is no longer whether the Romantic Tour is a major tour. That has already been answered. The real question is how this era will ultimately be remembered. Will fans look back at the Romantic Tour as Bruno Mars' biggest touring achievement? Will the 2026 and 2027 stadium run become one of the defining concert tours of this stage of his career? Will more dates eventually push the total beyond the current figure? Or will the massive 2027 schedule become the final chapter of this extraordinary journey? Those questions remain open. But one thing is already clear. The Romantic Tour has become much bigger than its original blueprint. It has crossed borders, broken ticket sales records, expanded across continents, and turned Bruno Mars' return to full-scale touring into a global event. And the 2027 schedule is arguably the clearest evidence yet. Japan will open the year. Australia and New Zealand will follow. Asia will then take over. Singapore will host 4 nights. Hong Kong will host 4. South Korea will close the Asian leg with 4 more. And throughout the journey, fans will once again have the chance to experience Bruno Mars on the biggest stages in the world. For Bruno Mars fans, this is not just another tour update. It is a milestone, a reminder that what began as a highly anticipated return to the road has grown into a worldwide stadium phenomenon. A reminder that demand can completely change the destiny of a tour. And a reminder that when Bruno Mars announces another date, fans have learned not to assume the story is over, because the Romantic Tour has already taught us one thing. There is always room for another chapter. So, as the current schedule moves toward 117 performances, the spotlight now turns toward 2027. Japan is waiting. Australia is waiting. New Zealand is waiting. Asia is waiting. And millions of Bruno Mars fans around the world are watching to see whether this enormous touring story has finally reached its limit, or whether another surprise announcement is waiting around the corner. For now, the confirmed expansion is already historic in scale. The Romantic Tour is no longer just a comeback. It is a global statement. And with 2027 now firmly part of the journey, Bruno Mars is proving once again that when the lights go down and the music starts, the world is still ready to watch. If you are excited about Bruno Mars' 2027 tour dates, the Romantic Tour, the Japan shows, the Australia and New Zealand stadium concerts, or the upcoming Asian dates, let us know in the comments where you want Bruno Mars to perform next. And if you enjoyed this update, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay connected for the next major Bruno Mars tour announcement. Because if the history of the Romantic Tour has taught us anything, the story may not be finished yet. But the story of the Romantic Tour becomes even more fascinating when we look beyond the headline number. 117 performances is a number that immediately grabs attention. But the real story is what that number represents. It represents the extraordinary demand surrounding Bruno Mars at a moment when stadium concerts have become increasingly difficult to scale. It represents a performer who can move from one market to another while maintaining enormous audience interest. And most importantly, it shows that Bruno Mars has created a touring era that fans simply do not want to end. The 2027 announcement changes the perception of the entire tour. For months, fans had been following the 2026 schedule from one major destination to another, watching Bruno perform in packed stadiums and celebrating every new moment from the Romantic Tour. Every city brought its own atmosphere. Every night produced new fan reactions. Every special guest appearance created another viral moment. But then came the announcement that the journey would continue. Suddenly, 2027 was no longer an empty space on the calendar. It became the next chapter of the Romantic Tour. And that matters because Bruno Mars is entering 2027 with something that many artists spend years trying to build: enormous global momentum. The tour has already established itself in North America and Europe. It has traveled through some of the world's most important music markets. It has filled some of the largest stadiums and venues available to a touring artist. Now, the spotlight shifts toward Asia Pacific. and this could become one of the most memorable portions of the entire tour. Japan alone represents a major undertaking. Bruno Mars is not simply appearing in Tokyo and leaving. The schedule takes him across several major Japanese markets, creating a true nationwide stadium and dome experience. Nagoya, Sapporo, Saitama, Osaka, Fukuoka, Tokyo. That geographic spread is significant because Japan has one of the world's strongest live entertainment markets, and Bruno Mars has a long history of popularity among Japanese audiences. The combination of Bruno's international superstar status and Japan's massive appetite for live music creates an obvious recipe for high demand. And then there is the production itself. Imagine the logistics behind bringing the romantic tour into multiple Japanese venues within the same month. The stage has to move, the equipment has to move, the crew has to move, the musicians have to travel, the dancers have to rehearse, the lighting and video systems have to be rebuilt. Every venue has its own architecture, regulations, schedules, and technical requirements. To the audience, it may look effortless. That is the point. A successful stadium tour is designed to make an incredibly complicated operation look completely seamless. Then, just when fans think the Japanese chapter has reached its conclusion, the tour moves to Australia. And Australia brings another major opportunity: Perth, Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney. For major markets, followed by Auckland in New Zealand. These are not random locations. They are some of the biggest entertainment markets in the region, and stadium performances in these cities can become enormous cultural events. There is also the addition of Thailand as a special guest for the Australia and New Zealand dates. That detail gives the shows another layer of excitement. Thailand has developed a major international profile, and her appearance alongside Bruno Mars creates an interesting meeting point between contemporary global pop, R&B, and Afrobeats-inspired sounds. Then there is Anderson.Paak. For Bruno Mars fans, Anderson.Paak needs almost no introduction. Their Silk Sonic partnership became one of the most celebrated collaborations of the modern era, blending soul, funk, R&B, showmanship, and old-school performance aesthetics. Seeing Anderson return as DJ Pia, we adds another familiar element to the live experience. It connects the current romantic era to the Silk Sonic chapter without turning the tour into a nostalgia show. And that is an important distinction. Bruno Mars is not simply looking backward. He is building a show that combines his past with his present. The biggest hits are still part of the experience, but the newer material gives the tour its current identity. That balance may be one of the biggest reasons the concert continues to resonate with audiences. Fans get the songs they grew up with. At the same time, they get to witness a new Bruno Mars era as it happens. Then comes Singapore, for performances, for nights at the National Stadium. And once again, the number of shows in one city tells its own story. A single performance would already be a major event. 2 would demonstrate strong demand. 3 would be remarkable, for shows indicate that the market can sustain an enormous level of interest. And Singapore is only one stop in the Asian chapter. Thailand follows, then Taiwan, then Hong Kong, then the Philippines, then South Korea. The route creates a chain of major music markets across Asia, turning the 2027 schedule into something much larger than a handful of international appearances. It becomes an extended regional tour within the larger global tour. And here is where the 117 show figure starts to feel almost unbelievable. 117 concerts means 117 individual nights where an enormous production has to be ready. 117 stages, 117 sound checks, 117 sets of doors opening, 117 crowds waiting for the first note, 117 opportunities for something unexpected to happen. A guest appearance, a spontaneous interaction, a different outfit, a new arrangement, a viral fan moment, or perhaps one of those unforgettable Bruno Mars performances that suddenly dominates social media overnight. That unpredictability is part of the appeal of following a tour this large. Fans may know the set list, they may know the venue, they may know the date, but they never know exactly what will happen once the lights go down. And that is where Bruno Mars has always been particularly effective as a live performer. His shows are built around precision, but they are also built around personality. The choreography is rehearsed. The musicianship is rehearsed. The lighting cues are rehearsed. But the interaction with the audience can change from one night to another. A crowd can sing louder. A fan can hold up an unexpected sign. A guest can appear. A particular song can receive an unusually emotional response. And suddenly, one concert becomes the night everyone talks about. That is how touring eras become cultural memories. Not simply because of the official schedule, but because of the moments that happen between the scheduled moments. The romantic tour has already produced plenty of those moments. And with dozens of additional performances now scheduled for 2027, there are countless more opportunities. But there is another side to this expansion that deserves attention. The longer a major artist remains on the road, the more difficult it becomes to maintain the same level of performance. Bruno Mars is known for an extremely demanding live show. He sings. He dances. He performs choreography. He plays instruments. He interacts with the audience. And he leads a large ensemble of musicians and performers. Doing that night after night across continents requires enormous physical and creative endurance. That makes the 2027 extension even more impressive. It suggests a level of confidence in the show's production, the team behind it, and Bruno's ability to sustain the performance at the highest level. But it also raises a fascinating question. Could this be the final stretch? Or could the romantic tour continue growing? At the moment, fans should be careful not to treat speculation as confirmation. The currently announced dates are the dates that matter. Anything beyond them remains unknown until officially announced. But history has already shown that the romantic tour can expand when demand requires it. That is why fans continue watching every announcement so closely. One new date can change the total. One new city can change the route. One additional market can create another wave of international excitement. And if Bruno Mars decides that the tour should continue beyond the currently announced schedule, the 117-show figure could eventually become another milestone rather than the final number. That possibility is what keeps the conversation alive. But even if the schedule stops at 117, the achievement is already enormous. Consider what it means for an artist to launch a major